Hi everybody, welcome back to INTR 101, College Success Strategies. Now today we're going to talk about something kind of big, and that's project management. But cue dad joke, it was really terrible. But we're going to talk about what project management is and what it includes. So in general, it's the planning, execution, completion, and evaluation of a large project. So these projects are usually more involved than just like your day-to-day homework assignments or anything like that. And the timeline tends to be a bit longer than, say, a week or two that you would have for a normal essay or homework assignment, like I mentioned. Additionally, other people or resources are often involved in these large projects. So you might be asking yourself, what is the difference between action planning and project management, right? And the answer is not like a whole lot. It's all about scale though. So first, you're going to work on the big picture, and that's figuring out what is the point of the project and creating an outline action plan. So this first action plan is going to be like, what are the major tasks that I need to complete? Maybe your project has several different parts to it, so you might have some kind of like natural divisions to it. And then you're going to give yourself some rough deadlines to work towards. Now, this is incredibly important when you've got projects that might be like 8 weeks long, if they're like up to a midterm, or maybe they're an entire semester long. So giving yourself those deadlines is going to be really helpful for preventing procrastination, because oftentimes we are very good at putting things off. So the point of this sort of big picture first approach is to get an overview of how exactly you're going to complete the project and to give yourself some scaffolding. Then you're going to take it down a notch and you're going to get more involved and more detailed action plans for the time between big due dates. So maybe your first due date is that there's a rough draft due at midterms. All right, what are all of the more involved and detailed steps that go into that? So you'll make a plan for each component of the project. Maybe you have to do an essay, a presentation, and some sort of like multimedia element of it. You're going to make an action plan for each one of those. So you can action plan at any scale that works best for you. Maybe you just have a slightly more detailed one, but it's not like super specific for every little piece. Or maybe you have one that's like very detailed. It's all about what sort of action planning works well for you. Now, in this case, it's really important to include any sort of resources that you might need, especially if they're going to be heavily involved with the project. So if you're working on, say, like a senior project for art and architecture, that may involve connecting with some community businesses as well. So you want to make sure that you're planning that in, because they work on different timelines than folks on campus do. And there may be a lot of waiting. So you want to try and access those resources or partners early so that you're set up for success in the long run. Now, what's important to remember about this is you're giving yourself enough structure to be successful, but you're keeping flexibility in mind. So when we have these super long timelines, it's really easy for things to get held up or for things to take longer than expected. So we want to make sure that we're not holding ourselves to too strict of a deadline and that we're accounting for all of that sort of like squishiness of deadlines when it comes to like these big projects. Alrighty. Next, you might ask yourself, like, what could go wrong, right? You know, like I have a perfect plan together. Everything feels really great. So now you need to consider, you know, what are some outside factors that might impact your project? So I already mentioned one, which is if you're working with a resource that's not necessarily on campus, they have totally different deadlines than campus does. So that's one thing. Some other things are, let's say you have to order materials. There might be a holdup on those, especially right now during a pandemic. There could be a shortage of certain things. So you need to accommodate, or you need to account for sort of like shipping time and things like that. So there's a lot of outside things that could kind of mess up our timelines. So some other like quick things to keep in mind is that deadlines might change with some of these long projects, right? Like You may have originally until the end of finals week, but now your professor is moving it up to the start of finals week, so they have enough time to grade. So you want to keep an eye out on BB Learn and email to regularly stay on top of those sorts of things. Additionally, you might have to work in a group, which I'm guessing a lot of you feel the way that I feel about group work, and it's not great. It really kind of sucks to have to depend on other people for a really big grade in a class. And then additionally, life might happen. So we're in the middle of a pandemic right now. So we're all kind of used to the fact that things can change kind of last minute. But there could be other things that are more personal that pop up. So make sure that you stay connected with your instructors if an emergency comes up. And remember to include some flexibility early in those planning stages so that if something happens, you're still able to complete the work in a reasonable amount of time. Now, I want to take some time to really discuss group projects because they can be really frustrating for a lot of people. And in the past, when I've talked about it, this is the one thing that students really ask to go more in depth on. So just some general tips on handling group projects. Meet early and often. A lot of times I meet with students and they're like, yeah, we met once at the start, we have a middle check-in, and then we'll meet like the day before the thing's done. And if you have a group that works really well together, that you've like worked together before, that might be enough. However, it's really good to include some more like check-ins throughout this project. And that helps to ensure that everything gets done, but also that the bulk of the work isn't put on one person. Now, it's also a good idea to get some sort of group message going, whether that's over text, Microsoft Teams, Discord, Facebook, whatever works best for your group. Have some sort of line of communication. That way, if something isn't going to plan on part of the project, you can connect and discuss it right away. Next, assign the work clearly and early. When you sit down for your first group meeting, figure out what all is going to go into this project and then divvy it up in a way that's really equal and equitable, and that it's very clear what the expectations are for each item in the project. And then, like I mentioned, schedule check-ins. Intermediate deadlines help to keep the project on track. We talk about this a lot with action planning, and you want to incorporate that into your group projects as well. If you have to give a presentation for your group project, schedule a time to practice. Trust me, as an instructor, everything looks much better when I can tell that a group has like practiced a few times on their presentation versus seeing a group presentation that clearly it's the first time they've presented it that morning. So just, a day before, 2 days before, meet to go through the presentation, make sure the pacing and the timing is right so that it fits in with any time limits that you have on it, and so that it looks more polished and professional. All right, so the big question whenever it comes to group projects is, what if a group member isn't helping? How do we handle that? So there's a lot of text on these slides, so I'm going to go over it kind of piece by piece. But number one, keep track of communication within the group. So that's why it's so important to have some sort of like group message going. And what's nice about that is that you have a clear paper trail, which helps to show that you tried to reach out. So you can either show that to other group members or to that person to be like, hey, I've messaged you 3 times this week and you've never responded. Like, we really need to check in about the project. Can you please get back to us? Or if you need to take this to an instructor to get some support, you again have that clear paper trail of like, look, we really, really tried, and now we're coming to you for help. Next, contact the professor about it early. So don't wait until like 2 days before the whole project is due to reach out and say like, hey, this group member never actually helped with it. If a group member hasn't responded to messages, then check in with the professor to see if they can help contact them, right? Because sometimes an email coming from an instructor has way more impact than an email coming from a peer. So if it's early enough in the project and you're still not like hearing from that person, loop your professor in so that they can kind of help with some of that. Next, if you're grading each other, so sometimes a professor will ask for like group grades, include information in your peer grade, right? So include any sort of like contacting struggles, any sort of like organization struggles, anything like that. What's important is that you want to be specific and not petty. So you want to focus on what you did to reach out and the parts that they were assigned but didn't complete. So you don't want to include any language of like, this person is just like lazy or X or Y. Like, you just want to say very clearly, I reached out to them 4 times, they never responded. They were in charge of this section of the project, and therefore it wasn't completed. So just being really clear about that. And that does a couple of things. One, it makes you look very professional, right? Like, we don't want to be super like mean and kind of catty about these things, because we don't know what's happening in someone else's life. They might have a really big like emergency that popped up that they didn't feel comfortable sharing with others. So that's one good part of it. 2 is it gives the instructor a very clear picture about like why certain parts of the project are missing or not completed to the same level as some of the other ones. And then next, like I mentioned, keep in mind that people are going through a lot right now. So be civil and polite when you reach out. I understand that it can be really, really frustrating, and you might want to like snap at this person and be like, why the heck haven't you engaged with this? You're the reason we're going to fail. Like, it's really easy to kind of use that language, but chances are people aren't engaging with some of these things because they have so much on their plate right now. So take that into consideration. Alrighty, so we're going to look at a quick example, and that's the project that you have for this class. Now, it is basically like a 8-week-long project. You've known about it for a few weeks now. You should have a rough draft in by this point, and we know when the final due date's going on. So if you're looking at our big project for the class, there's a couple of questions that you want to ask yourself, like, what goes into the project? How many proposals are required? Are there any word count requirements? And then finally, you want to ask yourself, how could you break up this project into more manageable pieces? So after I opened up the final project tab on BB Learn, one of the things that you could have started to do was build out how exactly you want to get that first draft in by the 12th. After you get feedback from me, now it's all about trying to figure out, okay, how am I going to edit my project and get it turned in by the 10th. So take some time for yourself and kind of go over how exactly you want to work out this project. And then the thing I want to leave on is having you try it out with whatever sort of midterm you need to study for or large life goal that may be coming up. So try a couple of things. One, build a large scale plan to give yourself that scaffolding and that structure for the entire project. And then build a plan for the next 1 to 3 weeks. That's more of a like detailed nitty-gritty type of plan. And one thing to consider while you're building this out is try and identify what are some factors that you don't have control over that you need to build flexibility into that plan for. Now, this is also what I'm going to have you do for the deliverable this week. So I highly recommend just giving it a couple of tries and see if it helps you kind of feel more prepared for what's coming up in your classes. Alrighty, with that, I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your day, and I will talk to you all soon.